Hello and welcome to Lesson 3, Vygotsky's Theory of Cognitive Development. This young handsome chap is Lev Vygotsky, and we're going to look at his proposal for how young children develop their cognitive abilities. Let's start with the spec. As always, as you can see, you need to know Vygotsky's theory of cognitive development, including the zone of proximal development and the concept of scaffolding. So, a bit of background. The theory developed into what's referred to as a social development theory. And the key element is that cognitive development doesn't occur in some sort of biological vacuum. It's directly influenced by the child's environment. So he believes that community plays a central role into the process of making meaning of the world. Unlike Piaget's notion that children's development must necessarily precede learning, Lev Vygotsky argues that learning can trigger or lead to cognitive development, and that this is culturally specific. We'll see what this means in a bit. In reality, according to Lev Vygotsky, no single principle can account for development. So if we think about Piaget's argument about equilibration, this idea that the new information that cannot be assimilated has to be accommodated, that explains assimilation or accommodation, explains how all information, new theories, new concepts are required. Vygotsky argues that there's no single method by which this occurs. What he does agree with Piaget on is, broadly speaking, that children are born with certain innate functions or abilities, and the abilities he highlights are slightly different from the ones that Piaget focused on. So Piaget was interested in things like sensory motor functioning, whereas Lev Vygotsky is interested in what he calls elementary mental functions. And these functions are ones that cognitive psychologists such as us, we look at and we're quite comfortable with talking about, such as perception, attention, memory. So babies are born with these functions. However, these can be combined to produce the higher mental functions that we might use every day, such as complex mathematics, algebra. These are a synthesis of perception, memory, and being used in a particular way. And the transition from the simple to more complex mental functioning, according to Vygotsky, is the result of experience, but specifically it is culture. It is being exposed to, well, we'll see the specific mechanisms, but this occurs in a cultural context. And a quick example might be this. Consider the relatively modern concept of note-taking, writing things down. This is a way of effectively extending our short-term memory and long-term memories. So we don't have to try and remember everything. But if you go back to ancient Greece and these great orators who would tell tales like the tales of Ulysses or and those sort of epics, they didn't have that same sort of function. They couldn't just write it all down. So for them, they promoted the methodologi, these memory techniques that were used to store huge amounts of information about storytelling, essentially. These are two examples of how cultures have adapted strategies to help with the same issue, which is essentially long-term memory retention. Cognitive functions, even those carried out alone, are affected by beliefs, values, and tools of intellectual adaptation of the culture in which a person develops. So what we should see is severe cultural differences between mental functioning, especially at the higher level, complex mathematics, for example, because of this cultural element. The final thing is that higher functioning only applies to humans. Vygotsky is not willing to award our animal cousins the ability to perform higher functions. Okay, so the role of others. if culture is really important, well, another factor in the social development model is that the role of other people in our intellectual development is also really important. So they highlight these more knowledgeable others, or what we would refer to as experts. So children learn from problem-solving experiences with others. The tutor in any given situation may model behaviour or provide strategies and instructions for the child, and Vygotsky calls this collaborative dialogue. Anyone with greater knowledge can be considered experts, and that includes the child's own peers. And to begin with, the expert will interrupt the child and assumes most of the responsibility of the learning. However, gradually the hand is over to the child, who takes responsibility for it. So consider this is a personal experience I have myself. A 2.5-year-old child is taken to a friend's birthday party. She's clearly nervous and stands by the side, refusing to take part in the games. Her father gives her some simple strategies of how she might integrate herself into the social situation by just follow the other kids and copy what they're doing, ask questions, etc. The child engages tentatively at first, but gradually becomes a bit more confident. At later events, similar parties and play dates, wherever they may be, the father gradually withdraws the scaffolding, the support, the expertise, and allows the child to flourish on their own. This is an experience you have almost every day of being in school. A teacher will, give you some idea about a concept, or more importantly and more beneficially, will provide you strategies for which to tackle a particular problem. The problem may be knowledge gathering, or it may be knowledge retention or application knowledge or whatever. They will apply with strategies or give you strategies. You may apply them, and as you get better and better at it, the teacher will report back. Language is another important thing for Vygotsky. According to Vygotsky, culture is transmitted through language, specifically the symbols, which we call semiotics. As a child learns, they begin to engage in self-talk. So the language of the culture literally becomes the language in which a child communicates with themselves. So it's a bit like, it's not quite like the same language. It's not like talking in your head. That's not what he means. But he is talking about the very symbols that you learn when developing and engaging in that language become the foundation for your own thinking. And this allows intellectual development to occur. Okay, this is probably the most important part of Vygotsky's theory, and it's a concept that is fairly relevant today called the zone of proximal development. Few teachers escape their sort of training without hearing of this theory. So the zone of proximal development refers to the region or gap between a child's current ability and essentially the next step up, the next ability that they could attain. And the zone could be seen as sort of a target where you've got skills that you can do on your own, skills that you can do with help, and then skills that you can't do yet at all. So think about an example at GCSE. If you studied psychology at GCSE, you probably focused on AR1 and all your evaluations were formulaic. Essentially, the entire exam was a regurgitation exercise. There is almost no independent thinking that you would have engaged in during that exam, apart from calculating a mean or something like that. Everything would have been regurgitated from memory. That is a skill that when you start your A-level, you already have. The bit you struggle with is going to be the next step. Taking a scenario that's unfamiliar to you and learning how to apply it to a theory, or apply a theory to it. So let's take flip learning. Flip learning is not something most people can do off the bat. Some people are excellent independent learners and they get it, but it takes a little support. So what's the teacher do? The teacher provides strategies such as providing guide notes, providing, asking the student to make questions about stuff they don't understand from the video, to read the guide notes, to Google alternative, definitions and things like that, set up group chats. These are all things, conversations that we would likely have had about how you go about using this material. As you become more proficient, and it takes a while, it takes a couple of months. As you become more proficient, the flipped learning becomes absorbed into the zone of proximal development, and then that becomes a task or a skill that you have, an ability you can perform. And then the next step will be to gradually pull some of that support away. So the ideal next step would be to remove the guide notes, or cut down the guide notes, or make them, simplify them. Alright? That's the idea of zone of proximal development, that you're scaffolding children's learning. Another example, a young child can't solve a jigsaw puzzle on their own, so the adult will say something like, why not look for all the edge pieces first? Yeah, so don't try and make the canary in the middle, let's go for the edge pieces straight away. That's a strategy that the child learns, and then gradually the more knowledgeable other will pull the support away. They may even do a little bit of the picture for them to build their confidence, but it's all about withdrawing that support as they start to master the task. Scaffolding then. This is a concept added by Jerome Bruner. And really what scaffolding is a way for the novice to solve problems or carry out tasks, complete a goal that would be beyond him unassisted. The expert teacher creates a scaffold, and we sort of talked about this in the zone of proximal development, and gradually withdraws the support. The aim is for the student to work independently. The teacher must not, and the aim is not to have the teacher do it for you. Take an evaluation point in A level. There is no reason why a teacher can write all those evaluation points for you, and you could just go away and memorize them, similar to GCSE. But that's not the aim of the game. The aim of the game is to develop a skill. So what a teacher might do instead is they might give you a scaffold, a sentence starter. And I've done this with you guys frequently when I say things like, use the exact phrase, this matters because to conclude from your evaluation. Do you have to use that? No. Would I like you to use it in the exam? Ideally not. But for now, it will structure your learning until you can do this on your own. Another one is the PEE evaluation. Do all evaluations have to follow that structure? No, they don't. And in fact, the compound evaluations that we're learning now are much stronger as a result. But to begin with, it's a way of ensuring that you absorb that just out of reach knowledge into your zone of proximal development, and then we can build on it. Scaffolding, you'll be amazed at how much scaffolding your teachers actually do for you. Right. Evaluation Vygotsky theory then. There is a great deal of evidence to support Vygotsky. So one thing is that there has been a lot of cross-cultural research to support the idea that children do develop different skills and different strategies in different cultures. And Gredler from the guide notes is a good example of how a culture who doesn't require the same level of mathematical skills that is prominent in Western culture develop a strategy for dealing with that. And there is at least one culture that hasn't got a full concept of number. They've got a concept, I think, of one and many, but there's no specific numbers within their culture. And when you look at their sort of very specific hunter-gatherer existence, you can sort of see why. Animal research, Savage and Rumbau argue that actually Vygotsky's idea that animals cannot develop language is, they criticize it. However, they support this idea that culture, being put in a rich cultural environment in which language is frequently spoken to you, can help you develop language. And they demonstrate that Kanzi, this ape, can use these pictograms or pictographs, what we call a lexigram, to actually put those together to make sentences or, instructions like "me want banana" and stuff like that. Evidence of the role of language. Carmichael carried out a classic study now that's quite famous, gave participants one of two labels for certain drawings, for kidney bean or a canoe. When participants were subsequently asked to draw the shape, it differed according to the label that they'd been given. This shows that the word can affect the way we think and actually remember things. And we kind of know this already, that having if I ask you a question before I give you a piece of information to read, that question will alter the way that you actually interpret the information. Sinclair Desoit tried to teach children who could not conserve conservation, and they found with very little success. Now that criticises Vygotsky because that argues that by enriching the environment culturally and trying to teach these ideas, like in this case conservation, they should be able to learn it. But if Piaget's right, they weren't at the correct stage yet. So a big criticism of Vygotsky is that actually there is evidence for biological stages in development. Remember, when we're criticising Vygotsky, you can use the evidence supporting Piaget to criticise him. Norton and Leland observed young children working with their mothers on a series of jigsaw puzzles. In increasing difficulties, the mothers offered help in line with Vygotsky's predictions. In the case of the easy puzzles, mothers intervened little because the task was within their zone of proximal development or below it. If the puzzles were moderate, mothers encouraged the child to solve the problems by themselves. If the puzzle was difficult, the mother would provide lots of help and strategies. This shows that experts adjust their input, and it's probably a feedback. It's probably parents will make a judgment based on when they see their kids struggling. They'll automatically go and help more and then pull back as the child masters it. Some other evaluations. Freund conducted a study in which children had to decide which items of furniture should be placed in a doll's house. Some children were allowed to play with their mother in a similar situation before attempting it alone, whilst others were allowed to work by themselves. Freund found that those who had previously worked with their mother showed greatest improvement compared to the Piaget group, and this suggested evidence for the zone of proximal development. A couple of final evaluations then. Well, Piaget is probably one of the most famous psychologists of all time, and certainly his work has been scrutinised to infinitum. Vygotsky, in comparison, has had much less attention given to his work, and therefore you can argue hasn't undergone the same scrutiny. One criticism may be that some of Vygotsky's predictions are difficult to operationalise. Limitations of the social approach generally. Piaget underestimated the importance of social factors. However, Vygotsky likely overestimates them, and it does seem that there are biological stages beyond which a child cannot develop certain skills. They can certainly master the skills they have and generate superb strategies to get around them, but you can't just parachute an 8-year-old into Cambridge and expect them to be doing quantum physics within a few months. They just do not have the biological readiness for that. So that's Vygotsky. It's a bit of a whirlwind tour, and we'll go through it in a lot more detail in class. If you have any questions, as always, please do write them on the guide notes, bring them with you, email me, homing pigeon, I don't mind, just get those questions to me. That shows your thinking. And think about your own zone of proximal development. What tasks in psychology can you do on your own? And what task is just out of your reach that having support would help you achieve? I will see you around. Goodbye.